to remove this towel and everything will be totally...
Hello Internet, and welcome to the DCOM review. Your one-stop DCOM shop for the best, the worst, and everything in between. Today's review, Invisible Sister. Invisible Sister is based on the book of the same name, written by Beatrice Colon and Sarah Pinto and brought to life by DCOM mainstay and personal favorite Paul Hoen. At this point, Hoen has basically mastered the art of creating movies with more humble surface agendas and on a much smaller scale, at least compared to the Kenny Ortegas of the world or even the Dwayne Dunhams of yesteryear. Needless to say, he's been at this for a very long time and has managed to engage me in pretty much every one of his films. Does his latest movie hold a candle to his previous work? Well, let's dive in. Our story begins in the middle of just another school day down in New Orleans. The film wastes little time as it dives right into the expected focal point of the movie, the relationship between two sisters, Cleo and Molly, portrayed by Rowan Blanchard and Paris Belleric respectively. From the start, they don't seem to be the closest of siblings, and part of that is due to the fact that they are very different people with very different social groups. Yeah, alright, nothing you haven't seen a million times, but here's where we get our first dose of something interesting. Molly is clearly the more popular of the two sisters, but unlike most stories where the prototypical popular girl lets it get to her head and belittles most people who aren't part of her posse, Molly is presented as a pretty decent human being, all things considered, who seems to genuinely want to hang out with her less than social sister Cleo. In this story, it becomes clear almost immediately that Cleo is the one rejecting her sister and not the other way around. It's an intriguing position when you find yourself rooting for the popular/perfect girl to actually win, because she's the one that seems more in the right. So within the first couple of minutes, we're introduced to most of the major and minor characters, and the especially minor parents who show up for all of 5 seconds before being whisked away so the rest of the plot can happen. I would think that said parents, despite the low screen time, would show a bit more interest in the daughter that gets straight A's. But it does help get across the point regarding the multiple interpretations of invisibility, both the literal and the metaphorical, which we'll get into later. Backtracking a bit, we're shown a scene of Cleo's science teacher, Mr. Perkins, played by Alex Desert, challenging Cleo's brilliant young mind to do something more advanced with her science project. And to make things extra special, he's making this project half her grade. Yeah, I'm not really sure you can just up and change the syllabus on a whim, but whatever. So later that night, Cleo was working on the project with her best friend George, played by Karen Brar, cause I don't know, I guess all the good young actors were out sick during casting, or something. While that is happening, Molly has her lacrosse teammates over for a pre-game party. Awkwardness ensues in the form of Ravi or George or whatever, while Cleo accidentally creates invisibility and proceeds to turn the best moth CGI can buy invisible. Sort of. It kind of flickers a bit to the point where you can still somewhat make it out. Cleo ends up losing the moth, but it appears later flying into Molly's cup of water as she proceeds to drink an invisible moth. Yeah, that happened. I originally had a problem with the heavy dose of screenwriting convenience that would make it all possible for a lost moth to find its way back into Molly's window, but I'll get into why that actually works later. So, when the morning comes, we have our first look, in a manner of speaking, of the invisible sister. Molly naturally panics while Cleo tries to figure things out. They decide against calling for medical help, even though telling an ambulance you literally can't see yourself probably qualifies as a legitimate emergency. But hey, plot needs to happen. So Molly decides that Cleo should simply pretend to be her on this day, since today is proclaimed as the most important day of her life. I would say this idea could work under slightly different circumstances, but just look at these two actresses. I can buy them as sisters based on a few physical features they seem to share, but identical is a bit of a stretch. Firstly, Rowan has a completely different frame compared to Paris. It makes it pretty obvious that one is younger and the other is older. Not a terribly large difference, but a difference Molly's closest friends should be able to recognize. Maybe I'm just nitpicking here, but the way I see it, if you're gonna go the whole switch identities method, you're better off using twins, or at the very least, two people who are closer in age. But this newfound identity gives Cleo the chance to live in her sister's world and discover things about the both of them that have been buried deep inside. This leads into one scene I thought was particularly clever. Molly's boyfriend, known as the Cow, played by Austin Freiberger, and I'm not making that name up, brings in a bear costume for the school's Halloween party. While Molly is invisible, she takes the costume in an effort to talk to Carter, the boy that has tried to ask Cleo out earlier, and who seems kind of into her, in addition to acquiring a microscope from the school's lab to hopefully reverse their whole invisibility situation. This movie already established that invisibility is some sort of contagion, as it spreads to clothes with enough contact from the affected individual. However, the bear costume takes longer to succumb to the invisibility disease because the costume is a great deal thicker than most clothes. So, logically, it would have to take more time to create the same effect compared to normal school clothes. I know it's a pretty minor detail, but it shows nice attention to the internal logic of a cinematic universe where invisibility is somehow a thing, but still needs to follow a certain set of rules. A couple more things happen before the big lacrosse game where it should theoretically become a lot more apparent that Cleo is a fake Molly, but her friends aren't what you might call future scholars, so I'll just let the movie have this one. So, as to be expected, Cleo, who has never played a single sport in her life in all likelihood, struggles as she's thrown into the lacrosse game. However, the invisible sister has a plan, and that plan is to throw integrity out of the window and start doing what most people would do with invisibility, and that's taking advantage of it. So, for the rest of the game, Cleo charges the net while Molly knocks over unsuspecting players on the opposing team. So we've basically gone from a DCOM and straight into a Buffalo Wild Wings commercial. And I'm okay with that. So, of course the team wins, and everyone is happy, and this leads to an interesting moment with Molly. Despite being the biggest factor towards her team winning, Cleo's the one riding everyone's shoulders. She's the one everyone notices, and it really starts to affect her. You can easily tell that she's had about enough of being the unseen one and wants her life back. This marks a major turning point for the film, the point where the situation becomes a lot less novel and things need to start happening before things start to become irreversible, both physically and emotionally. So, because it's still Disney, they have until midnight to do their science magic and get Molly uninvisible. Or, I guess, just visible again. Or she'll stay a frog, invisible forever. It needs to be said that a fair amount of the characters in this movie are supposed to be more intelligent than most, and it kind of shows. Despite my grievances with Charon's character being awkward and uninteresting, he's never some incompetent sidekick type. When they need to plan something, their plan is pretty spot on in terms of what they need to get done, right down to the minor details. This is the kind of thing that would have been overlooked under different direction. So Molly and Cleo need to capture another CGI moth, and when things go south, Molly can't take it anymore. This leads to a genuinely great emotional moment shared by the two leads, where they can get out everything they feel about each other and themselves. Remember the moth that flew into Molly's window? That scene foreshadows the eventual realization that Molly is like a warm light that makes the people she interacts with happy. And because Cleo was posing as her sister all day, she now understands that. This explains why the original moth was attracted to Molly from a symbolic standpoint, and also, to a lesser degree, why all of her friends seem to act so similarly, since they all represent a swarm of moths attracted to the same light. It's a really intelligent use of symbolism in this movie to take these seemingly insignificant details and have them all build up to something pretty special. They eventually capture a moth, and Molly has to use her invisibility one more time so that the others can sneak into the school and recreate the invisibility experiment. Not too much to talk about here. Molly scares the guard by pretending to be a ghost, nothing you haven't seen a million times before. But the organic compound they create turns out to be too complicated for our heroes, so they must turn to another. In this case, Carter, who also happens to be particularly skilled at chemistry. They all head to the Romp the Swamp party, which will serve as our every DCOM has its dance cliche for the evening. Once there, we get a really nice moment from Kao with him freaking out about not having seen Molly in so long and leaping to the conclusion that she wants to break up with him. It's not a particularly important moment, but the reason I bring it up is because before this scene occurred, I would have come away from this movie thinking that Kao was just another prototypical imbecile. Instead, he's an imbecile with a heart, and for what it's worth, that scene helped put him in a brighter light for me, at least until he starts talking about half-invisible babies. So once they find Carter a nice barn to work in, our heroes get back to work on making Molly visible again, but with only 45 minutes till midnight. They synthesize the antidote, but their first attempt at the cure fails as Mr. Perkins confronts the group. In one of the more harebrained moves out of Molly, she decides that pouring flour on her head to prove her sister's brilliance was more important than becoming visible again. She does this as opposed to working on the antidote before the deadline, knowing that Cleo and the others already figured out the chemical components needed for invisibility. When the antidote fails and the deadline is crossed, Molly adds ginger fizz to the concoction, and of course it works despite the deadline. But we get a nice ending where Carter ends up with Cleo, Molly is still with Carl, and George is dating Molly's best friend Nikki. And Cleo is winning accolade after accolade for her scientific breakthrough, which, in the real world, would have earned her a Nobel Prize. And the film resolves with the invisible sister becoming visible again, and the metaphorically invisible sister now becoming visible too. Now, let's take a look at the characters, which, for me, plays a huge role in how memorable a DCOM ends up being. Rowan Blanchard is particularly memorable in her character arc, slowly transitioning from brooding to beloved. Her transition into a much less standoffish character is in line with the relationship she has with her sister Molly, and the nuances of Rowan's character portrayal I thought were particularly great. Coming from the perspective of someone who loves Girl Meets World, it was nice to see her portray someone less smiley as a change of pace. Paris Belric has solid sister-like chemistry with Rowan, and does a good job portraying the character of Molly, even though her character doesn't change too much. But part of it is that she doesn't have to. She's not the problem here. It was always Rowan's character that had to change to resolve the film. She was very believable as a popular girl with a heart of gold, and since I've never actually seen Mighty Med, this was my first time actually experiencing Paris's acting, and for what it's worth, I did enjoy her performance. I never had any affinity towards Ravi and Jesse, or any affinity towards the show Jesse in general, so I didn't come into this movie thinking that Karan was going to make the movie any better, and in my opinion, he kinda didn't. He was just kind of there, and when he did open his mouth, well, he tried to be funny, but I guess the jokes just didn't land for me. I can understand the people that actually enjoy his performances, but for me, it just doesn't do it. The rest of the supporting cast was okay, but for the most part, somewhat forgettable. For a movie like this, that's perfectly fine, because the focus really should be on the two leads, so I don't think that aspect takes too much away from the film. I like the fact that Will Meyer's character, in Carter, was very upfront about telling Cleo exactly what bugged him about her. He wasn't just some guy with a crush. He had enough self-respect to not take Cleo's standoffish personality so lightly, because he strongly believes that people shouldn't treat people like that. And you know what? He's right. Kao and Nikki are just kind of there to fill up the roster spots of boyfriend and best friend, so nothing too special with them, although they did show some nice qualities throughout the course of the movie. But, as I said, just a little bit forgettable for me. And that's Invisible Sister. So, what's the verdict? Invisible Sister is a solid movie filled with great leads, great emotions, and the kind of intelligent filmmaking we should come to expect from Paul Hoen. It's not a perfect movie, and some of the decisions they make just don't work. Like, if the deadline is midnight, but there's still time for a second antidote trial, why bother with a timer at all? And the whole sister swap still sort of bothers me, but it does open the door for some nice movie moments, so I guess it gets a pass from me. If you like Rowan Blanchard or Paul Hoen films generally, I can confidently recommend this flick to you. If not, well, there's still some good stuff there to keep you entertained, and the handling of the figurative versus literal invisibility that holds the movie together from start to finish works out exceptionally well. It's fun, it works, and thank God it did not go overboard with the Halloween imagery. And that's the review. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and help me out by subscribing, liking, and, even more importantly, getting some conversation going. Not just about Invisible Sister, but about all DCOMs, and what DCOM I should try and tackle next. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Okay, I'm kind of losing my mind right now.
You have no idea what's actually happening to me.
We still have time. We can't give up.
Sorry, just talking to my invisible sister.